Hey, what's going on? Richard Bryce here. Today, I want to help you with your forehand. We're going to be looking at things that you can do to improve your forehand technique. Now, I'm not going to be going into minute detail about the technical elements and the biomechanics because I've covered them in other videos and there's a lot of videos that talk about it. This one is going to focus more on the application and actually helping you to implement changes and address the things that you need to address in order to improve your technique. So I hope you find the video helpful. If you do, it'd be fantastic if you give me a thumbs up, and if you haven't already done so, make sure you subscribe to my channel. Okay, so to help you improve your forehand technique, we're going to work through this video in 3 phases. Phase 1 is going to be about identifying what you need to work on. Phase 2 is going to be about how you actually work on it and implement the changes. And then part 3, we're going to talk about some of the things that are potentially holding you back and preventing you from making the changes and improving your technique. So part 1, what should you be working on in the first place? There's lots of different components to your forehand. They're all important, but what you need to understand is that shots are sequences of events. There's different steps, different things involved in you hitting a high quality shot, but it's a sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And if 1, 2, 3, and 4 aren't working, it's going to be really hard to get 5, 6, 7, and 8 working. Hopefully that makes sense, right? And this is where a lot of people go wrong. They focus on something that is important, but because there were issues earlier on in the sequence of steps, they never actually get to fixing the thing that they're working on, because you've got to get each bit working in turn. And it's a horrible old cliche, but basically learning to walk before you can run. Now, I'm not going to talk about grips. Grips are important, but that can be a piece of it. I trust that you've got a grip. We're not going to focus on that. So what we're going to focus on are identifying the steps. So all shots should start with a split step. If you're not doing a split step, that's the first place that I would start working. The next thing that happens is the unit turn. Now, the unit turn, we've got the upper body turn. Generally, it happens in addition to some kind of pivot with your foot. So you've got the split step, you need to be doing that. If you're not doing it, that's what you should focus on. If you're not doing an effective unit turn, that's what you might need to focus on. The next thing that's going to happen is going to be the movement to the ball. So we do our split step, we do our unit turn, we then move to the ball, and we've got to set up in the right position. And this one's going to be really important because so many of the things that people struggle with technically are just because they're not prepared in time, they're not set up in the right position, and then because of that, they can't make the rest of the technique work. So potentially what's holding you back might be your movement to the ball and setting up in the right position. You might need to focus on your distance from the ball, your spacing, something like that. And then next, we've kind of got the swing and the shot itself. So we've got set up in position. Hopefully our body is prepared. We've got our unit turn. Our racket is going to be back somewhere, depending on the specific technique that you're using. There's different variations of this, but you've got to be set up ready for your shot. Next, we've got the actual swing itself. So we've got what the racket does, and we've got what the feet do when you're swinging. And we've kind of got the timing of when that works. So again, we've kind of got 1, 2, 3, and I think now we're on phase 4 of the shot. Then we've got the contact point, and everything in tennis comes down to the contact point. The most important thing is that you get the angle of this racket head controlled at the moment of contact relative to the speed of your swing. But if you didn't do the split step, you didn't do a good unit turn, your preparation wasn't good, you weren't set up in time, and then you swung late, the chances of you getting a good quality clean contact are going to be much, much more difficult. So although maybe you want to think about what's going on with your wrist, and it is a really important piece of the puzzle, if there were 3 things going wrong before that, focusing on the stuff later on might be problematic. After the contact point, we've got the follow through, and now the follow through is just the product of what happens before it. I know some coaches talk about thinking about the follow through, and yeah, if you need to think about following through to enable you to achieve a certain contact and swing path, then that's fantastic. But just understand that it's physics. It's all happened before that. Once you have made contact with that ball, anything that the racket does after that cannot have any impact, any effect on the ball. So it's all happening before contact. The follow through is just a product that comes after it. If you've done all the stuff that goes before in a certain way, the follow through just happens. But then the next phase that we've got is going to be the recovery after your shot. So they're the different elements of the forehand. You've got to identify which one of those is problematic, and then you need to work on them, and you probably want to work on them in order. That's going to be a huge piece of the puzzle. Now, probably the best way to do this is to record yourself on video. And by recording yourself on video, it's really scary the first time you do it, because we're all watching these amazing pros on TV, and then you see yourself and it's horrible. But you've just got to get used to the fact that we don't look like the people you see on TV. Record your strokes, see where things are going wrong, and then make adjustments from there. So that's part one, identifying what you need to work on, remembering that it's a sequence of events, and you've kind of got to get the first stuff before you get the end stuff. So now that we've identified what it is that we need to work on, the next step is working on it. And this requires discipline, and this requires focus. Making changes actually requires a lot of effort and a lot of energy. And what we know from kind of the stages of learning and motor learning theory is that things happen in a certain way. When you first start doing something, you have to think about it and you have to do it over and over and over and over again. This is called the cognitive stage of learning. You're thinking about what you're doing. So potentially, I'm already doing a split step, perfect. We've identified that that's working, but what I'm not doing is a good quality unit turn, and the thing that I want to focus on is taking my elbow a little bit higher on the unit turn. So the reason I might want to do that is because it's going to allow me to get more leverage over the ball to generate racket head speed. So I've identified that this is what I need to work on. Now I've got to work on it. Now there's a lot of different ways that you can work on it, and where I suggest you might start in this scenario is just practicing at home. So I'm out on a court because I like being out on a court, but with my left hand I did a lot of practice just at home, because you've got to do this probably a couple of thousand times before it's going to be automated. Now maybe you want your racket in a slightly different position. Whatever you choose to do is what you need to focus on. But what we're talking about here is how you make it happen. So I program that in. Do repetitions without the ball. Then you're going to get out on court, whether you're with a coach, whether you're with a ball machine, whatever you're doing with a practice partner, then what you have to do is still focus on it. So every shot that your practice partner hits, all that you're thinking about doing is unit turn, unit turn, unit turn, thinking about where that elbow is going. And that is the only thing you think about for a period of time until it becomes automated. And that's basically how you adjust technique. So why so many players struggle to adjust technique is, firstly, they're not focusing on the right thing. And because they're focusing on something that comes later on in the sequence, it just never stood a chance in the first place. And the second thing is they're trying to change too many things at once. Your brain can only handle so much information. Change requires effort, so you've really got to focus on one or maybe two things at a time. For me personally, the second thing I always focus on is keeping my head still on contact. Now I know that goes a little bit against what I've said because it's one of the last things that happens, but it's just so important for consistency that it's always something that I'm working on. But other than that, you want to think of just one or two things at a time and just focus on it and literally have an ongoing conversation in your head where you're talking positively to yourself. So, okay, unit turn, elbow high, unit turn, elbow high, unit turn, elbow high, or whatever you need to say to yourself or visualize to make it happen, but keep saying it in a positive sense. So if I'm having a rally and then, I hit the first shot, I do it, great, next ball comes along, and on the next one, I don't do it, my elbow's not in the right place, I don't do the unit turn very well. What I absolutely don't do is, Richard, you suck, why aren't you elbow up? Because that is active coaching, that is not going to help. You just until it becomes automatic. It might take a month, it might take 2 months, but it takes however long it takes. But once it's become automatic, then you'll never really need to think about it again. Then it'll just be natural and you'll just have that lovely unit turn. And then you can move on to the next thing. So this might sound slow and it might sound cumbersome, but this is how learning occurs. And the reason that so many people don't improve at tennis is because they don't have this good practice and training strategy. You don't go from a 3.0 to being a 5.0. That's not how it works. You have to incrementally improve, and improving, genuine improvements, take time, but this is the process that you use to make it happen. Which then brings us on to the final thing that we're going to cover in this video, and that is that some things are going to hold you back and prevent you from implementing what I've just said. And this is stuff that you've probably heard me talk about a little bit before, and the reason that I talk about it in all my videos is because it's so important. There's two parts to everything in tennis. There's, do you know what to do? There's thousands of videos that talk about that. The second part is that Are you actually capable of making it happen? And this is where it falls down for so many people. This is where it falls down for me. This is why I'm not a professional tennis player playing on TV, because my body doesn't function at a high enough level to allow me to play tennis like the people on TV. Because if it did, then I'd be playing on TV. So this is kind of the way it works. So you need to take a look at your body and you need to kind of start to assess and go, is there something that's preventing me from developing my technique? And the first place that always starts is going to be with a visual system. Everything you do is based on how well you can see. So, you know, what I just talked about there, the split step, the timing of your split step is based on visual information. The unit turn, you've got to react and predict where the ball's going before you can make the unit turn. So a lot of players are slow to prepare a move to the ball, which, as we've just talked about, comes first because the visual system doesn't work well enough. Timing. If you can't get optimal timing, it's going to throw everything off. And this is why you see so many people kind of arming and forcing the ball and hitting it late, because plain and simply, their visual system will not allow them to start their swing at the right time. So if those things are going on for you, the only way to kind of get past that, yes, you want to include the tactics that I've talked about at the start, but if stuff isn't working well enough to play at the level you want, you've got to address those things. Fortunately, that's something that you can do. You can train your vision, you can work on your ball tracking, you work on your distance judgments, depth perception, and when you work on that stuff, it allows you to make these adjustments with your technique, because unless you can do the visual stuff that's required on each shot, your body's always going to have to compensate in some way. So to help you get started with that, I've got a free tennis vision starter program I've made. I'll place a link down in the description. I'll place a link up there. Spend 5 or 6 minutes a day working on it, and it'll start to address some of this stuff. But we also need to talk about the movement side of things. Tennis strokes are complicated things. They're very complex movements. So the forehand is kind of complicated. There's a lot of stuff going on. And the important thing to understand when it comes to tennis strokes is these big, complicated movements are made from smaller movements. And if you don't have the ability to control each part of your body independently, you don't suddenly step out on court running and everything works perfectly. So what you need to do is you need to spend time working on your body. So if you don't have control over your shoulder blade, you need to get control over your shoulder blade, especially if it's on your playing arm, because that's going to be crucial. If you can't control your wrist very well, then you need to get control over your wrist, because that's the contact point. If you don't have control over your pelvis and over your hips, then it's going to be really hard to time the ball well and to use your full kinetic chain. So just the reality of the situation is a lot of the time players aren't able to improve their technique, partly because they've got a bad practice strategy, but hopefully we've covered that in this video. The other reason is their body just doesn't function well enough. But again, just like with a visual system, you can train this stuff. You can make your body move better. You can improve your coordination with a little bit of effort. Now, I don't have a pre-program for you on that one, but I do have a web class that I've created that talks about all this stuff in more detail. Now, this might sound horribly and salesy. I apologize if it does. I do have a product to sell you. I'm not going to lie about that. But if you want to play tennis at a higher level, you have to get your body working at a higher level. It's just the way it works. So I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you didn't get too put off by the things that I said at the end. But the reason I try and emphasize this stuff over and over again is because it's the truth. There are lots of tennis coaches out there. There's fantastic information all over the internet. But if your body isn't capable of doing it, it's not capable of doing it. You've got to get your body capable of doing it. And that is one of the big things that I focus on with my own game. Obviously as a right-hander, and now that I'm relearning to play left-handed, just doing the simple things off the court to allow you to have all the fun that you want on the court. Okay, hope you found this video helpful. I'd love to hear your comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts about what I've talked about here. Do you feel like you practice in the right way? Let me know what you think in the comment section.